Hi everybody, today we're going to look at rights. Now makes up an important part of component one, democracy and participation element of that, and we're going to look at rights, what they are, how they work in the UK, and a couple of the key debates on them. So what are rights? Well, they're legally protected freedoms, and the idea is that everyone should have these in a democracy because they are absolute, and that means they cannot be compromised or diminished. They are universal, which means they apply to everybody, and they are fundamental, which means they cannot be removed. Now, the rights that we should enjoy include the right to fair and equal treatment by law, including things like a jury trial, freedom of expression. Now, this takes a form of freedom of speech, freedom of written word, and freedom of press. We should have freedom of conscience, which means we can believe what we like, so therefore that also fills into freedom of religion. We should have political freedom. That means we should have the right to vote, to join political parties and pressure groups, and to stand for election and things like that. We should have freedom of movement, so we shouldn't be restrained on where we can go, and we should have the freedom to join a trade union. Now, it does feel a little bit odd creating this video as I am in the middle of lockdown, where the fundamental one on this list that says cannot be compromised or diminished is freedom of movement, which has been curtailed in the UK over recent times, unless you desperately needed to get to Durham, in which case it was all okay. Right, so rights in the UK. So we have got a kind of a history and development of this over time. The UK is interesting when it comes to these rights, because all those rights that I mentioned on the previous slide, I said we said to enjoy those in the UK, but it's not really been codified and written down as the same way that it has been in other countries, for example, in the United States of America. So rights in the UK, it all starts with Magna Carta in 1215, where the nobility managed to restrict the powers of King John, who was acting like a tyrant, and this established the things like he couldn't just take property off people, and he had to give people a fair trial and things like that. The next major development is in 1689, which again is Parliament asserting itself and restricting the power of the monarchy, and we get a kind of fixed parliaments, and the monarch can't just get rid of them when they want to get rid of when they don't want to listen to them anymore. And Parliament starts to develop from that point onwards, really is the dominant force in UK politics. But if we go forward a very long time, we then get to the European Convention on Human Rights, drawn up and signed in 1850, comes into force in 1853, and that created the European Court of Human Rights that people could appeal to if they felt their rights were being infringed on in their own country. It really is a reaction to the horrors of World War II and the atrocities carried out by the Nazis, and it really echoed the UN's Declaration of Human Rights, which followed World War II. So in that, gave us a legal framework to defend rights if needed. The Human Rights Act of 1998 was set up by Blair's government, and this started to try and codify to set out the rights that they have. Well, the difference in this in the UK than in places like the US, it's just an act of Parliament, so it could be repealed. So we have the right to life. We're not allowed to be tortured or subject to degrading treatment. We're protected from what we call arbitrary arrest without reason. We have the right to a fair trial. We have the right to privacy and family life. So these bits are kind of enshrined in that act, and this has played an important role in the legal and political system of the UK since, where people have challenged actions by government on the basis that it infringed some of these rights in the Human Rights Act, and therefore it's been left up to judges to make those decisions. We have the Equality Act of 2010, and this brought in a lot of previous kind of acts banning various forms of discrimination over time. We've got to put it all into one place, and it stated there were 9 protected characteristics: age, disability, gender reassignment, marriage or civil partnership, pregnancy or maternity, race, religion/belief, sex and sexual orientation. And it is essentially illegal to discriminate on any of those characteristics, and they are protected characteristics, and therefore need to be upheld and respected within the UK. And there was an act brought in 2010. So we can see rights kind of coming into action in the UK. Now, the other side of having rights is having responsibilities, and this is the slightly trickier side of it. So if we're going to enjoy all these rights, which should never be impinged on by our government, according to our ideas, and this fits into something that we'll do much later in the course when we look at liberalism, and liberalism underpins a lot of the ideas in our society when it comes to things like rights. But our responsibilities are: we should respect and obey the law, we should pay our taxes, we should not act in a way that harms other people. That harm is whether it's deliberate or non-deliberate. It might be that you're not trying to hurt people, but you are hurting people, and if that's happening, that is an action you should stop doing. We should show respect for our key political institutions like Parliament and our government institutions like our police forces. We should vote. Now, this is a slightly more controversial one, because there are some who argue that we should be made to vote. It is our responsibility to vote, and therefore there should be a mechanism of fining people, penalising people who don't. And one of the counters to that is that might be again impinging on people's freedom, because you're making them do something they don't want to do. Maybe we need an abstain box on our voting forms. So also your civic responsibility to serve in a jury if called. And we also have kind of broader civic responsibilities, and these are things to do with maybe positions that we hold or roles that we have in society. So if you are a parent, then you have civic responsibilities in terms of the bringing up of your children. If you are a public figure, then you have kind of greater civic responsibilities because your actions can have a wider impact. Right, so some of the debates on this. So first of all, there's this debate in terms of types of rights. So there are positive rights. These are rights given you by constitutional law. So the American Constitution has the Bill of Rights attached to it, and that states these freedoms that American people have, and therefore they are very, very strongly defended. And they include things like you'd expect, like freedom of religion and freedom of expression, and then also slightly crazy things like the right to bear arms, which causes more problems than it solves, you could argue. Now, we in this country don't have a codified constitution, but as I've already mentioned, we've had the Human Rights Act, which positively enforces some of those acts. The other way we get rights is what's known as negative rights, and this is when you can do something because the law doesn't tell you that you can't. So anything that you are not strictly forbidden from doing, i.e. is illegal, then you have the right to do it. Now, this can cause some problems. So, for example, we saw a rise over the last few years of what was known as legal highs, and these weren't illegal drugs, but really the general feeling was it doesn't mean that people should have been taking them, and then the government has tried to unpick things and deal with them as time's gone on. So we could then ask, are our rights effectively protected in the UK? And many liberals would argue not, because we haven't got that codified constitution like America has, giving positive rights are reliant on negative rights. When positive rights are given, they could be taken away with acts of parliament. All negative rights that we have could be taken away with acts of parliament as well. But some others are saying there's this long history, as we looked at before, of rights in the UK, and democracy ensures that those rights will continue. Again, that's something for you to think about, delve into, and make your own decision. There's another debate on whether it is Parliament or the judiciary that's best placed to defend our rights. So you could look at the judiciary and go, well, they're neutral, they're expert, but on the counter, they're not elected. So really, it should be Parliament's job to ensure political and all the other freedoms. Now, whether Parliament does a good job of that or not is debatable, and you could argue it's going to depend on who's in government and what kind of parties you've got in Parliament and all kinds of different things. So that's, again, another interesting debate. And there has been clashes between courts and government in recent years, and we've seen that, for example, when it came to things like Brexit and the proroguing of Parliament. So this is kind of a delicate issue in terms of who has the best position to protect the rights of the UK people. There's also been a lot of interesting and difficult issues when it comes to rights, when it comes to dealing with a lot of the problems in the modern world. So how do you deal with terrorism whilst allowing lots of freedom? How do you monitor terrorist suspects? How do you uncover these plots without breaking some of the fundamental freedoms you were there? What about deportation? I know we saw a lot of stuff with this with Abu Hamza going and deportation to Jordan, in terms of, well, is we got someone who wants to deport them, but can we deport them if they risk torture or other things at the other end? How do we deal with protest movements? So, for example, when Extinction Rebellion kind of took over the centre of London, what powers should or shouldn't the police have in dealing with that process? It's a peaceful process, but when does that start to impinge on the rights and the ability to take part in their normal life of other people? And then there's really kind of difficult areas such as digital monitoring by the government. So we're going to see that with the Track and Trace Act. Well, how much of that information is the government going to have on people? How much information should the government have on people? Should they be monitoring email? Should they be monitoring social media? So there's all kinds of different stuff in terms of digital monitoring and how much information the governments can gather on us. There's also things like antisocial behaviour, because on that you could talk, well, people are breaking this don't harm anybody else civic responsibility, but what in reaction to that should happen in terms of their rights. Right, so another key element in terms of rights are pressure groups. These often play an important role, and they either campaign to instill human rights where they don't exist, or protect human rights where they already do, and then bring to attention to the public or the government or the press examples when human rights are being abused or not being strictly adhered to. So we see groups like this on a broad scale, like Liberty and Amnesty International. We see pressure groups who deal with particular sections of society in terms of protecting their rights. So the Stonewall, which has campaigned tirelessly over the years for gay rights. And we've got organisations like the Howard League for Penal Reform that look at the treatment of prisoners and their rights. So we've got another important element of our political system which looks at rights, which then, again, this could be added to earlier debates on how well are rights protected in the UK. Right, thank you very much for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave me any comments. And I'm going to continue working through Unit 1 and all the other different bits of A-level politics. There's also a load of A-level history stuff on my channel as well. So if you're doing A-level history as well as A-level politics, check that out. See if I've got stuff on your unit. Right, I'll speak to you all again soon. Thank you very much.